April 29th, 1945. A Sunday. The sky over Bavaria was cold and clear. Somewhere to the south, Munich was burning, and moving fast toward a town called Dachau, about 10 miles northwest of the city, were the soldiers of the United States 7th Army. They thought they were clearing a route to Munich. They had no idea they were about to walk into the worst thing human eyes had ever been forced to see. The men approaching that morning belonged to two divisions, the 42nd Infantry Division, the Rainbow Division, under Major General Harry Collins, and the 45th Infantry Division, the Thunderbirds, under Major General Robert Frederick. These men had been in combat since the beaches of Sicily in July 1943. 500 days of fighting, more than 10,500 casualties in the 45th alone. They had buried their friends in Italy, in France, in Germany. They thought they had seen everything war could show them. They were wrong. The Thunderbirds came from the American West, Oklahoma, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, farm boys, ranch hands, factory workers, some of them barely 19 years old. Their battalion commander was Lieutenant Colonel Felix L. Sparks, born in San Antonio, Texas, on August 2nd, 1917, raised in Arizona, a man who had fought his way from the landing at Sicily to Anzio, where he was one of only 2 survivors from his unit during one of the worst nights of the Italian campaign. Sparks was tough. He was steady. He had seen men blown apart by artillery and kept walking. What he was about to see in Dachau would shake him to his core. As the soldiers of the 3rd Battalion, 157th Infantry Regiment, pushed toward the camp complex from the southwest, they smelled it first, a stench that hit you like a wall. They thought at first it was dead livestock or something rotting in the fields. They were 2 miles out. The smell was still getting worse. Then they reached the railroad tracks. 39 boxcars sat on the rails, silent, motionless. The doors were sealed. Sparks himself described what happened next. He looked into the first freight car. Inside was a pile of bodies 3 meters high, stacked like firewood. The dead were naked. There was vermin everywhere. Brain matter was visible on the ground near one of the cars where a skull had been crushed. Most of all, etched forever into Sparks's memory, was the sight of a little girl with her eyes still open, lying on top of the heap. The official U.S. Army investigation later confirmed that those 39 cars held approximately 2,000 corpses, brought to Dachau from other camps, as Germany's rail system collapsed under Allied bombing. 2,000 dead human beings, abandoned on a rail siding, left to rot in April sunshine. American soldiers, who had fought through North Africa, Italy, and France, stood at those boxcars and vomited. Some sat down in the dirt and cried. Some could not speak. And then the crying stopped, and the rage started. Dachau had been open for 12 years. 12 years. It was the very first regular concentration camp built by the Nazi regime, announced by SS leader Heinrich Himmler on March 22, 1933, just weeks after Hitler became chancellor. It was built on the site of an old munitions factory about 16 kilometers northwest of Munich. The first prisoners arrived 2 days after the announcement. Communists, socialists, journalists, anyone the Nazis considered an enemy. 5,000 was the original capacity. By the end, more than 206,000 registered prisoners had passed through its gates. 206,000. And the dead at Dachau and its subcamps? Historians at the Dachau Memorial Site have documented 32,000 deaths, but scholars who study the full camp system estimate the actual number closer to 41,500. Thousands more were never registered at all. If you find documented history like this important, subscribe. It is the best way to support this work. And comment below, what city are you watching from right now? This script is researched and factual. Our primary sources include the peer-reviewed academic paper by Jürgen Zerowski, published in Dachauer Hefte, Volume 13, in 1997, titled That Is Not the American Way of Fighting, which used the classified 1945 Whitaker investigation records that only became publicly accessible in 1992. We also drew from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's collection of documents, donated by Felix L. Sparks himself signed over to the museum on December 8, 1992, which includes his personal recollections and recreated unit journals. Now back to Dachau. Dachau was not simply a prison, it was a laboratory. From 1942, SS doctors conducted medical experiments on living prisoners. SS physician Sigmund Rascher, working on behalf of the German Luftwaffe, locked prisoners in tanks of ice water for hours to study how pilots could survive cold ocean crashes. Of the roughly 300 prisoners used in the freezing experiments, about 1/3 died as a direct result. Other experiments simulated altitudes of up to 68,000 feet inside decompression chambers. Witnesses reported that Rascher dissected the brains of prisoners while they were still alive. Over 2,500 prisoners too weak to work were shipped from Dachau to Hartheim Castle in Austria, where they were gassed with carbon monoxide by the personnel of a facility disguised as a psychiatric hospital. The camp also executed over 4,000 Soviet prisoners of war at a nearby SS shooting range, Hebertshausen, between 1941 and 1943. These men were never counted in official camp totals, and the guards who ran this place, they were trained there. Dachau was the original training center for the entire SS concentration camp guard system. Every method of cruelty, every regulation, every punishment structure used in camps across Nazi-occupied Europe was first developed by Commandant Theodor Eicke in Dachau in October 1933. He wrote the rulebook. Prisoners could be beaten for the smallest infraction. Those who spoke against the regime could be shot on the spot. The guards who learned those rules at Dachau carried them to Auschwitz, to Treblinka, to Bergen-Belsen. By late April 1945, Dachau held 67,665 registered prisoners in a camp designed for 6,000. The typhus epidemic had already killed hundreds that month alone. 10,000 of the 30,000 prisoners in the main camp on Liberation Day were too sick to stand. On April 26th, with the Americans closing in fast, the SS forced 7,000 prisoners, mostly Jews, onto a death march south toward Tegernsee. Guards shot anyone who fell behind. Many died of exposure and starvation on the road. The camp's final commandant on Liberation Day was SS Lieutenant Heinrich Wicker. He had just arrived, transferred in from another camp. The SS guards who had run Dachau for years had mostly fled by the time the Americans got there, but not all of them. Some stayed. Around noon on April 29th, Brigadier General Henning Linden arrived at the main entrance with soldiers from the 222nd Infantry Regiment of the 42nd Division, traveling with war correspondent Marguerite Higgins of the New York Herald Tribune. Wicker formally surrendered the camp to Linden. White flag, military protocol, handshake. The cameras rolled. And while that ceremony was happening at the front gate, the men of Lieutenant Colonel Sparks' 3rd Battalion were coming over the side walls of the camp. No ceremony, no cameras. Just 39 boxcars of memory still burning behind their eyes. What happened in the next 4 hours is documented in the classified investigation later titled Investigation of Alleged Mistreatment of German Guards at Dachau, conducted by Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Whittaker, Assistant Inspector General, completed and issued on June 8, 1945, and classified until 1992. Here is what the Whittaker report found. Near the back entrance to the camp, Lieutenant William P. Walsh, commander of Company Wine, 157th Infantry, shot 4 German soldiers in a boxcar after they had surrendered to him. Private Albert C. Pruitt then climbed into the boxcar and finished off the wounded men with his rifle. Walsh walked deeper into the camp. He then ordered his men to separate the Wehrmacht soldiers from the SS guards among the captured prisoners. The SS guards were marched into a separate enclosure. They were lined up against a wall. And then Walsh gave the order. A light machine gun, carbines, and a pistol or submachine gun opened fire. At least 17 SS guards died against that wall in the next 30 seconds. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the camp complex, approximately 50 German prisoners had been gathered by soldiers from Company the One and placed in an area next to the camp hospital, against an L-shaped masonry wall about 8 feet high, which had been used as a coal bin. The ground was covered in coal dust. Sparks watched the prisoners being brought in from various directions. A machine gun team from Company the Foreign was assigned to guard them. Sparks walked away toward the center of the camp. He had only gone a short distance when he heard the machine gun open fire. He ran back. A 19-year-old soldier, nicknamed Birdeye, was behind the gun, crying hysterically. He said the prisoners had tried to escape. Sparks grabbed him and kicked him away from the weapon. Birdeye had already killed approximately 12 of the prisoners and wounded several more before Sparks stopped him. Sparks fired his pistol into the air to signal a ceasefire. Wounded German soldiers were dragged away by the surviving prisoners as the American officer regained control. One German survivor of the coal yard, a man named Lindberger, later gave testimony to the German Red Cross. He said he survived only because the man next to him was shot in the stomach and fell on top of him. He described lying on the ground, bleeding, watching a man wearing a Red Cross armband walk up to the wounded men and throw razor blades at them, saying words to the effect of, "Finish it yourself." A wounded German soldier named Jaeger cut his own wrist and asked Lindberger to cut his other. Just as Jaeger was about to return the favor, an American officer arrived and the shooting stopped. That officer was Sparks. Across the camp that afternoon, men were also killed by liberated prisoners who had grabbed weapons or used tools from the campgrounds. Sergeant Darrell Martin of the 222nd Infantry Regiment reported that SS guards were shot at the camp's exterior moat and their bodies dumped in. Among those killed that afternoon was Heinrich Wicker himself, the SS officer who had formally surrendered the camp just hours earlier. Abram Sachar, who documented the liberation in his book The Redemption of the Unwanted, published in 1983, described the scene plainly. Guards were rounded up and summarily executed along with their dogs. General Dwight D. Eisenhower issued a communique that same day stating that American forces had liberated Dachau. He said approximately 32,000 prisoners were freed and 300 SS camp guards were, in his exact words, quickly neutralized. The Whitaker investigation led to courts-martial considerations against multiple soldiers, including Sparks himself. And then General George S. Patton arrived in the area. Sparks was summoned to Patton's office. Patton reportedly called the investigation a bunch of garbage in considerably stronger language and threw the investigation papers away in front of Sparks. After that meeting, no charges were ever filed. No one was ever prosecuted. The case was reviewed in late 1945 by Colonel Charles L. Decker, acting deputy judge advocate. His conclusion: there appeared to be a violation of the letter of international law, but given the conditions that greeted the first combat troops to reach Dachau, justice and equity did not demand that the difficult and perhaps impossible task of fixing individual responsibility be undertaken. The case was dropped. If this kind of documented history matters to you, subscribe. It is the single best way to support research like this. Drop your city in the comments. We read everyone. And this script was built from documents that were locked away for nearly 50 years, specifically from the Whitaker investigation records, first accessible to the public in 1992, as analyzed by historian Jürgen Zaruski and published in Dachauer Hefte in 1997, the same journal published by the official Dachau memorial site, not Wikipedia, not a cable documentary, the primary documents. Now, back to the final moments. The 32,000 survivors who were liberated that Sunday were in catastrophic condition. 10,000 of them were too sick to walk. The German civilians of the town of Dachau were later ordered to dress in their best clothes, walk into the camp, see everything with their own eyes, and then bury the 9,000 bodies found on the grounds. Colonel Hayden Sears, of the 4th Armored Division, who had already seen the Ohrdruf subcamp 3 weeks earlier, ordered German civilians to stand close to the bodies and look, not from a distance, close. The liberators themselves were never the same. Felix Sparks went home to Colorado, became a lawyer, became a district attorney, served on the Colorado Supreme Court, became a brigadier general in the National Guard. He helped run the 157th Infantry Association for decades. He gave his personal documents about Dachau to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum on December 8, 1992. He talked about that day with great difficulty for the rest of his life. He died on September 25, 2007, in Colorado. Lieutenant William Walsh, who ordered the coal yard executions, was never charged. Private Albert Pruitt, who climbed into the boxcar to finish off the wounded, was never charged. The 19-year-old soldier called Birdeye, who opened fire on the prisoners and was crying as he did it, was never charged. Dachau itself was used after the war to hold SS soldiers awaiting trial during the Dachau trials, which ran from 1945 to 1947. Former Commandant Martin Weiss, who had run the camp for years, was tried, convicted, and executed. Then the facility was used to house German civilians displaced from Eastern Europe. It became a United States military base during the occupation. It was not closed until 1960. In 1965, 20 years after liberation, a memorial was finally established on the grounds. Over 206,000 human beings passed through Dachau's gates between 1933 and 1945. 41,500 estimated dead, 12 years of operation, 140 subcamps spread across southern Bavaria, 4,000 Soviet prisoners executed at a rifle range that most people have never heard of, 2,500 prisoners gassed at Hartheim Castle in Austria, whose deaths were never counted in the camp's own numbers. And at the end of it, 39 boxcars on a rail siding with 2,000 corpses inside, waiting in the April sun. The Dachau Memorial Site Archive, located at the site itself, contains the physical records of more than 200,000 individual prisoners. Most of them have names, most of them have dates, most of them have prisoner numbers stamped in the camp's meticulous ledgers. The Nazis, above all else, kept records. They counted everything. Every prisoner, every experiment, every gram of food withheld. And yet, the full count of the dead at Dachau has never been established with certainty, because in the final months of 1945, with the Americans 40 miles away and closing fast, someone in the SS administration began destroying documents. What they didn't destroy fast enough were the boxcars. On April 29, 1945, at roughly 4 in the afternoon, Felix Sparks stood inside the gates of Dachau and fired his pistol into the air over the coal yard to stop his own men from killing Germans. He was protecting the rule of law in a place where the rule of law had been murdered 12 years before. A photograph, taken by a United States Army Signal Corps cameraman, captured that exact moment. His arm is raised, his pistol is pointed at the sky. The coal dust is on the ground behind him. It is one of the most famous photographs of the liberation of Europe, and for decades, almost nobody knew what it meant. The photograph is in the United States National Archives. It was taken on April 29, 1945. The man in it became a Colorado Supreme Court justice. The men he was stopping from firing were 19 years old, and the men being shot against that wall had spent 12 years teaching the world that some people were not human. The Americans who stopped them had spent 500 days learning that war has no clean edges. They were right on both counts. That is the part nobody mentions when they talk about the liberation of Dachau. The liberators were not angels. They were men. And what they found there made them something else for about 4 hours on a Sunday in April. Then Sparks fired his pistol into the sky, and whatever they had become for those 4 hours, it stopped. The war in Europe ended 8 days later.